Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Elmhurst College. My name is Alan Ray, and I have the privilege of serving as president of the college. Tonight's highly anticipated event takes place in the context of the college's Democracy Forum, a year-long exploration of civic engagement in the United States. Civic engagement, I think most of us would agree, is the lifeblood of democracy. An engaged public is critical if the nation is to elect responsible public officials and make wise public policy choices. But, as we know, the democratic process in our country has been increasingly stymied by partisanship and gridlock, a condition that leads to cynicism about government and an unwillingness by our best citizens to enter the public arena. Where infighting and character attacks were once seen as tears in a fabric of professional civility and cooperation, impediments to getting the work of the people done, they now appear to be the norm. Ordinary Americans, I think, do not experience this level of obtuseness in their daily lives, where cooperation and compromise are simply taken for granted as the price of the social contract. In response, Elmhurst College launched the Democracy Forum, a series of lectures that's endeavored to shine a light on key matters of our civic life. Perhaps discussions like these can point the way to kinds of solutions that elude policymakers. This year's Democracy Forum events have also explored issues of access to education, to information, to economic and political opportunity, and considered whether a level playing field, a true constitutional democracy, can be achieved. The exploration of democracy and civic engagement marks the third consecutive year that the college has developed programming and speakers around a larger theme. Many of you may recall in 2009-2010, the Poverty Project captured our efforts to explore the everyday scandal of material poverty. This past academic year, Still Speaking, Conversations on Faith presented dialogues on faith, its varieties and contradictions and influence in the modern world. Still Speaking also marked the beginning of the centennial celebration of the graduation of Elmhurst's esteemed alumni, theologians Reinhold Niebuhr, class of 1910, and H. Richard Niebuhr, class of 1912. This year's Democracy Forum speakers have included author and radio host Michael Eric Dyson, senior analyst for CNN and staff writer for The New Yorker, Jeffrey Toobin, noted intellectual and former editor of Newsweek, John Meacham, Chicago civic leader Gary Chico, and political consultant and author Naomi Wolf. Some of you may remember we've also hosted Senator Mark Kirk and noted academic and expert on civic engagement Robert Putnam, as well as author and writer for The New Yorker Louis Menand and Fox News analyst K.T. McFarland, who served as Deputy Secretary of Defense under President Reagan. We close the year's Democracy Forum series with tonight's discussion, which promises to be a very special event indeed. Our speakers will be introduced in a moment, but first, our moderator will be introduced by Dr. Terry Walker, Associate Professor of Political Science here at the college. Dr. Walker offers instruction in American government and politics, constitutional law, public law, the presidency and Congress, and public policy with an emphasis on environmental policy. She's a frequent contributor to professional journals. I give you Dr. Walker.
Good evening. Justice S. Louis Rathje was born in Geneva, Illinois, and has been a lifelong resident of Wheaton. He received his BA degree from Wheaton College in 1961 and his JD from Northwestern Law School in 1964. Justice Rathje was admitted to the Illinois Bar in 1964, the Wisconsin Bar in 1989, and the Supreme Court of the United States in 1980. He was engaged in the practice of law at Rathje, Woodward, Dyer, and Burt in 1964 and was a partner with that law firm from 1970 to 1992. While at the firm, Justice Rathje worked with Bob Woodward's father, Justice Alfred E. Woodward, on many cases. In addition, while an attorney, Justice Rathje practiced law before Judge Bauer, when Judge Bauer was a circuit judge in the 18th Judicial District. Justice Rathje was elected circuit judge for the 18th Circuit and in 1992 and to the appellate court in 1994. In 1999, Justice Rathje was selected by the members of the Illinois Supreme Court to fill the unexpired term of the retired justice from the 2nd Judicial District. Justice Rathje is a member of the American Bar Association, the DuPage County Bar Association, the Illinois Bar Association, the Wisconsin Bar Association, and numerous other bar associations, and is a member of the Illinois Judges Association since 1995. Please join me in welcoming Justice S. Louis Rathje to Elmhurst College.
Well, it's the water here. Well, as Dr. Walker said, I'm Louis Rathje, and I'm going to be quote-unquote moderating this conversation here tonight. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Ray and the Elmhurst College for hosting this event tonight. I think that we're all going to learn a great deal. We had dinner with the two speakers that are here tonight, conversationalists, and just in that short time, I learned more than I have reading the New York Times today. So let me just say, I want to give a special thanks to Lee Daniels, who came up with the original idea of having these two gentlemen come here tonight. And he followed it all the way through. He got the speakers and he saw it from his inception to tonight. So I want to thank him for his efforts. Now, first, I want to tell you what the schedule that we have here tonight. We are expecting this to last 2 hours. And the reason for that is that Bob Woodward has a car taking him to Chicago tonight at 9 o'clock. So, in regards to this, first of all, I will introduce each one, and then there will be questions and answers and a dialogue between Justice Bauer and Bob Woodward. I will just sort of intervene every once in a while, and I want to let you know that tonight, and only tonight, will I be able to overrule Justice Bauer. Now, after that, after approximately an hour, we're going to do an hour from questions from the audience. And in regards to that, we're going to have microphones that are going around. Raise your hand so we can find out who wants a question. But there are going to be some requirements and restrictions. First of all, it's only going to be questions. No editorializing, no comments, no discussion about what you want to talk about, just the question. Secondly, the question should be addressed to who you want it to go to, whether it's Bob Woodward or Justice Bauer. Third is that there's only going to be one question per individual. So think of the best one you can come up with if you want to have your question answered. And secondly, I will have the liberty of cutting short anybody that wants to speak too long, because there's too much to know tonight to waste time except for good quality questions. Now, first of all, I want to introduce Justice Bauer. I always put him first because of his elevation to the Court of Appeals. He is presently a member of the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit and has been there since January 3rd, 1975. Prior to that, he served in the District Court of the Northern District of Illinois. He also was the District Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. He also served, and that's where I practice in front of him, he was Judge of the 18th Judicial Circuit. He also was State's Attorney. He was Assistant State's Attorney, and he's presently still on the bench. He's practiced law with the firm of Erlenborn and Bauer. I think most of you know who Erlenborn and Bauer were. And he held a position as adjunct professor of Elmhurst College, DePaul University School of Law, and Northwestern University School of Law. He's a graduate of our alma mater here tonight, Elmhurst College, DePaul University School of Law. He served as instructor in the National Institute for Trial Advocacy, a lecturer at the Willamette University in Salem, Oregon, past president of the DuPage County Bar Association, and frequent lecturer on the trial and appellate practice, and co-author of numerous books on criminal procedure. He serves today as a trustee of Elmhurst College, serving on the board of several institutions. Justice Bauer? Before introducing our next guest, I have to make a little bit of a confession here. We were standing outside talking just before in the anteroom here, and Justice Bauer and Bob Woodward's dad tried many cases together. In fact, when Bill was state's attorney and assistant state's attorney, during that period of time, they had 22 cases that they tried to verdict, 3 of which dealt with murder. And if we have time tonight, I'd like to have him recite a few of those cases that he had with Judge Woodward and Bob's father. Now, secondly, I'd like to introduce Bob Woodward. He's assistant manager and managing editor of the Washington Post, where he's worked there since 1971. He's won nearly every American journalistic award, including the Pulitzer Prize, which was given to the Post in 1973 for his report on All the President's Men, which became All the President's Men. Sort of a little insight to that. I don't know if any of you remember back at that time, but I knew nothing about what was going on in the Nixon papers, knew nothing about what Bob Woodward was doing at that time. And I went over to Europe in 1972, and all of a sudden I saw in the International Herald Tribune these articles written by Bob Woodward. And I was so excited about it, because I never heard of it before, that I put them all in an envelope and sent them back to Judge Woodward, so he at least knew what his son was doing. He started out, he's written, as you know, he's written several books, many books, including the Watergate, All the President's Men with Carl Bernstein. He's also run The Final Days, and in recent years, Woodward's book, The Secret Man, has revealed long-awaited answers behind Deep Throat, the source of who undercover agent for Watergate. Mr. Woodward has co-authored or authored more #1 national book-selling nonfiction books than any other contemporary. Now, he's also done several books since then, and he presently, as I say, is managing editor for the Washington Post. He's a graduate of Yale University in 1965. He worked worked with the U.S. Navy in communications, and then he went into journalism and got associated with the Washington Post. And I got to point out that the New York Times wrote that, quote unquote, Bob Woodward is the most famous investigative reporter in America. So I introduce Bob Woodward. I screwed up
Welcome to the club.
Now, when we first start, I'm going to start with the first question, and in deference to the judiciary, I'm going to ask Justice Bauer first. Can a litigant find justice in the court today?
Sure. That's a softball. One of the problems, of course, is your definition of justice. That varies from place to place. There are people that really are very unhappy if a person gets sentenced to a long term when they think it should be a short term, and they think it's injustice. And people are unhappy if they get off altogether. So, it depends on your idea of justice. To some people, justice is revenge. To some people, it's just getting even. And to some people, you do with deep sorrow. You punish people because that's what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
And,
do you have any comments on that?
Yes, I do. And,
I'm surprised.
It depends on where you're sitting about what
Amen.
Justice is. And I want to tell a war story that deals with this. It was about 30 days after Nixon resigned. So it's September 1974, and Gerald Ford is president. And some of you may recall he went on television early on a Sunday morning announcing that he was giving Nixon a full pardon for Watergate. Now, he went on television early on a Sunday morning, hoping no one would notice. He miscalculated. But I was asleep in a hotel room in New York, and my colleague Carl Bernstein called me up, and he said, "Have you heard?" And he was quite excited, and I hadn't heard a thing. And Carl, who truly has the ability, like you, Judge, to say what occurred in the fewest words with the most drama, said the following. Now, I'm going to quote him in a modified way because we're in a chapel. And he said, "The SOB pardoned the SOB." And I was able to decode that. And in 1974, I think like lots of people, we thought, gee, why does Nixon get off? Why does he get a full pardon? 40 people went to jail because of Watergate. Where is justice here? What happened? And there was an aroma that there was a deal between Ford and Nixon. And I kind of at the time, and I think a lot of people said this was one of the unexplained events in history, and you could argue that Ford lost the presidency in 1976 to Carter because of the suspicions about the pardon. 25 years late, so there was a deal, there was something stinky about it, there was something unjust about it. And 25 years later, I undertook one of my book projects about the legacy of Watergate in the presidencies of Ford through Clinton, and I called Gerald Ford up, who appointed you to the Court of Appeals, and said, "I'd like to talk to you about the pardon," figuring he would say, "I'm sorry, I've got a golf game for the rest of my life." But he said, "Fine, let's talk." And so I went to New York, where he was at a board meeting, talked to him for hours, had the luxury of time to get all of the legal memos that he had, interview everyone who is still alive about this question that pulsed. Why? What happened here? And talk to Ford. He was the most open man. His home in Colorado, his main home in Rancho Mirage, kept going back, doing drafts, what happened here, and kept asking him why. And I finally, I think about the 15th time, I said, "Why'd you do this?" He said, "I'm going to tell you." Al Haig, who was Nixon's chief of staff, offered me a deal. Said, "The president will resign if you guarantee that you will pardon him when you become president." And he said, I rejected the deal. I did not pardon Nixon for Nixon, or I knew I was going to become president because Watergate was finishing Nixon. And I pardoned Richard Nixon, not for me, not for Nixon, but for the country. I assessed at that moment in the fall of 1974, the economy was in the dumps, the Cold War was still going on. If there was further investigation of Nixon, an indictment, a trial, the jailing of a former president, we would be like a banana republic. And so I had to preempt the process and act under the Constitution to grant that pardon. I wrote this in the book that turns out I was wrong in the assessment in 74, that what Gerald Ford did was a very gutsy thing. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, called me up and said, Teddy, my Uncle Teddy, the senator from Massachusetts, and I read in your book about Ford, and we agree we're going to give Gerald Ford the Profiles in Courage Award for pardoning Richard Nixon. There at the Kennedy Library some months ago is Teddy Kennedy, who at the time in 74 had denounced the pardon as almost a criminal act, saying what human beings, politicians hate to say, I was wrong. This was a true act of looking out, trying to establish what the national interest is, absorbing the sense of the duty of his office. And there's Gerald Ford standing getting this award, beaming, vindicated to a certain extent in history. And I watch this and I say, what a cold shower, how sobering to be so sure at one moment something is a certain way, it's a deal, there is not justice here, and then you subject it to neutral scrutiny over time, and it is exactly the opposite. So, I'm sorry, long answer, but
It's a long
justice depends on where you sit
Sure.
and when you are looking at the events.
If he hadn't pardoned him, we'd still be fighting that. It'd still be going on. And I was kind of an incidental beneficiary of that sort of thing. I was a Nixon appointment as U.S. Attorney and as a district court judge, and I was having the time of my life. I enjoyed. And when Ford offered the Court of Appeals job to me, I was momentarily hesitant. And then I thought, after Watergate, that the next Republican elected would probably be the year 2080. And I didn't see
you were almost right.
I reckoned without Carter, but the fact of the matter is, I took the job, and I've never regretted it for 1 minute. So I knew Ford quite well. I did not know Nixon very well, because I don't think anybody knew Nixon very well. But Ford I knew, and he was a true gentleman and a very, very intelligent guy. Whatever the media thought about him, he was a very bright man.
Truly one of the underappreciated presidents.
Amen.
And in that time, he wrote his memoirs. I think it's called "The Time to Heal," and and he did it, as we look back on it, with a kind of grace and directness and honor that is not often seen in the presidency.
Yeah, hard to believe that was over 37 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Bob Woodward the next question. Where does the power of government lie in the federal system?
Oh, wow. It's not the judiciary.
I'm out. I'm safe on that one. Go ahead.
No, I had to say, I was telling this story. Some months ago, I ran into Justice Scalia, who's the conservative, strict constructionist on the Supreme Court. And he said in his way, Woodward, how come you always write about presidents? And I said, because that's where the power is. And Scalia, being not shy, said, wrong, wrong, wrong. And I said, why do you say that? He said, well, Article 1 of the Constitution, what is it? And I said, well, the legislature, see, they control. And I said, but that's not the way it's practiced. Look at wars. Constitution says Congress shall declare war. And for the last 60 years, presidents have declared war. How is that possible? How do we evade the Constitution in that way?
Nobody brings him to task. Each president, since George Washington, has been involved in extracurricular activities and fights and wars. Barbary Coast War, Civil War, none of these were declared. I don't recall any. There are very few declared wars that we've been involved in. First and Second World War, not Vietnam, not Korea. Pick one. It's not Spanish-American War, the Mexican War, and those, but then quit. So the fact of the matter is it's been going on since the history.
But as a jurist, does that give you
Yeah, but remember, in order for me to have a judicial impact, somebody has to bring a case, and it has to fight its way up to it. I'm not a roving knight, nor is the Supreme Court wandering out looking for some issue.
So you're not answering the question.
You know, his father wanted him to go to law school. And now you know why. The art of cross-examination is always to catch somebody when he won't answer the question and ask it again. Go ahead, ask it again.
Over to Louis.
Ready for the next one? Judge, let me ask you this question. Federal judicial nominations have increasingly become partisan battles. Where they're almost never, back in your day, there was never any of that kind of rancor. Why is that, and what can we do about it?
Well, sir, there was a couple of battles floating around in those days, but not many. What has really happened is that in the beginning, back when I was on, there was no television focused on anything on it all. Even the Supreme Court, that wasn't true. Justice Sullivan, or Justice Stevens, for instance, there was no television there when he was being interrogated. It just wasn't there. Television brought everything into the living room, and everybody has an opinion on it, and everybody uses it for their own purpose. When you start to if you watch some of the interrogation going on during the nomination procedures when they're talking to them, every time the camera focuses on a senator, look at the next senator, next one over, because he's going to be the next one to speak, and he's slicking his hair and getting ready for the big occasion. And he's going to show the world at large that he's smarter than anybody in the world, and he's going to humiliate this poor boob. And it is ratcheted up from that point. And I think it's the focus of media attention, not yours, of course, Harper, the media attention, generally speaking, that has brought this incredibly raw, goofy system to, So you wind up with Elaine Kagan answering a question. So what do you do? She's Jewish. What are you doing Christmas? She said, well, I probably, like all other Jews, I'll be ordering out Chinese out for an indoor. I thought it was a perfect answer. But why the hell ask the question? What does he care what's she doing on Christmas Day? So it's silly.
So it's largely the media's fault?
No. It's largely the people running for public office that are taking advantage of a photo op, a media opportunity to, for free, have all our constituents see how smart they are. And that's a fact.
See, I think it has to do with the definition of the job. And if you define the job being in Congress or being president, being partisan and only caring about your side, that's too narrow. And you have to really think about how these institutions function to make deals.
Yes.
Look,
yes.
American politics is a series of deals. Let's face it.
Consensus.
And if you're unwilling to do that, if you have either on the left or the right this ideological purity, and then it gets magnified through the media, which now is kind of left and right, at least on television to a certain extent. You have Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left, and a lot of people are looking at these shows to reinforce the conclusions and judgments that they've already made. Yeah. I think that's a shame. I think we need more neutral reporting.
That's most people's definition of justice. If he does what I think he ought to do, that's justice. If he doesn't...
You hear from the applause, there are 5 people who agree with me.
No. 6.
What? 6.
I joined.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let me go on to another question dealing with the media. As traditional news organizations diminish in size, in your mind, who is going to pick up the slack when it comes to watchdog work on our government and our other institutions?
Well, Louis, you're right. I mean, there's just a lot of slack. And as newspapers, particularly all news organizations, go through a convulsion, they don't have the money. Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google until about a year or 2 ago, somebody I know, and I remember having dinner with him one night, and I said, it's going to be on your tombstone, I killed newspapers. That's not necessarily something you want to hear at dinner. And he said, no, I love newspapers. And I said, well, I know, but you've taken all of our money. And like a good capitalist, he said, well, it's our money now. And in a sense, that's the explanation. They have taken the money. You have to have money to fund and do the kind of reporting that challenges the establishment, that really digs into something, and you have to have owners who are willing to take the risk.
who are willing to let you write the truth, whether that increases their advertising potential or not. And that happens fairly rarely, too.
Yes, I mean, during Watergate in the 70s, the Washington Post had a monopoly and was making all kinds of money, and Katharine Graham, who was the great publisher, she met with her advertising people during the coverage when we were writing these stories, and got around to the automotive advertising, and she said, well, how are we doing this quarter? And he said, well, we're down $7.4 million. And she said, huh? Yeah, down $7.4 million. A lot of the dealership owners in the Washington area didn't like what we were writing about Nixon. And Katharine Graham said, oh, okay, it's a good thing we can afford it. Well, we could afford it then. If the publisher, her granddaughter, now got that information, she'd have an aneurysm.
Okay, let me ask you this, Judge. How is the judiciary doing in the light of the many political and social issues that are facing the court today?
Well, the issues that face the court are common issues for everybody. They eventually reach the court. You know, in the old days, in Greece, for instance, when you ran into a problem, you went to the Oracle of Delphi, who examined the entrails of chickens and came to a conclusion. Now, if you stub your toe, you rush to a lawyer and file a lawsuit. Why is up there? So we have lawsuits on every subject known to man, and we're supposed to solve these little problems, without looking at chickens, of course. But the fact of the matter is we're functioning as well as we can under the circumstances. I don't think we're doing a perfect job, but I don't think anybody's doing a perfect job. No, if I ever meet a perfect person, I'm going to kill him. He shouldn't be, he's too good for this world, that's all. Everybody I know and have ever met has done something he was ashamed of. He's done something criminal, literally criminal. It may not be a big thing, it may be speeding, it may be something, he's broken the law.
Give us some more examples.
More than which?
Pardon?
More than which? If you think about it, besides speeding, who has not played a dirty trick on some student when he was in school at 16? Just to give you a current example. Anybody here got through their entire teenage without putting a dirty trick on some friend or anything?
We should, he's referring to the story about Mitt Romney when he was at the Cranbrook.
See, there's a conclusion jumper. I was just thinking in the abstract.
And story in the Washington Post about it, quoting lots of classmates who observed this. Now, do you think that story should be published?
I don't care whether it's published or not. It's all okay for me to publish, but make something of it like if the guy is still some sort of sadistic monster. It's silly. I'll give you one that really...
But it's troubling.
Oh, no, it's
I mean, I think it should be published, but we talked about this earlier. It should be in context of the whole person's life. Is it a pattern? And, you know, we now get a lot of sensationalism in the news media, manufactured controversy, and things get off the rails. And I read that story, and it causes some unease when, 20, 30 years ago, we were writing about presidential candidates. We'd do an 8 or 10-part series and try to put everything about them, whether it was good or bad, in context. It is the absence of context in something like that that has to make, makes your stomach churn.
I agree with you. That ranks right with Tom Sawyer painting a cat's rear end with turpentine, when he was a kid. It was a terrible thing, but, everybody liked Tom Sawyer anyway, but he wasn't running for president. But if he had been, that would have been a headline story someplace. I think you're quite right. If you can tell that story, in context, he was growing up, among other things, this is almost a chuckle thing. I don't like it, I didn't like it, I think it was wrong, and he said it was wrong. But those among us who have not goofed up when we're teenagers are just too pure for this world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you, Bob, what is the status of transparency in the present White House, and how does it compare with prior administrations?
My worry, and we were talking about this a little at dinner, is that we have too much secret government. That there is an impulse in the White House or any institution to kind of, well, let's conceal. It obviously reached its height with Nixon, and you listen to the Nixon tapes, and it is disheartening, to say the least, about the criminality, the abuse, and the smallness. So we need to hold presidents and those in the White House fully accountable for everything. Sometimes they are transparent and sometimes they are not. What I worry about is the natural reflex is too often, let's not tell the whole story. Let's spin it.
You mean the people inside?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to.
And so, I found it refreshing in the first months of the Obama administration. There was a question about one of his cabinet nominees, and Tom Daschle to be HHS secretary. And Obama actually went out and said, quote, "I screwed up." Now, of course, Clinton only used those first two words. But how refreshing to hear a president say, "I screwed up." Well, of course, then people piled on him, is that useful? Well, it was true, and it was his own assessment, but you've seen the president doesn't say things like that now.
True.
Okay. Let me ask you this, Justice Bauer. In high-profile cases such as the death of Trayvon Martin in Florida, which case has been accompanied by a lot of news articles and editorials, can the accused still receive a fair trial?
Well, he's getting a lot closer to it at the moment. They keep exposing medical testimony coming out as to the injuries of the defendant and the injuries of the decedent, which didn't come out before. Yeah, I think he can get a fair trial. I think one of the interesting things is that you can find 12 people, very intelligent people, who haven't heard a damn thing about that case, even in that area. My favorite one story in that is when John Mitchell was being tried in Washington, D.C., at the tail end of the Watergate thing. As they were selecting a jury, the first 75 jurors selected, of the first 75, 50 of them had never heard of Watergate except to think it was an apartment building someplace in Washington. Of the 25 that remembered it, 12 of them said that they read the stories about Attorney General Mitchell, and all of the stories were favorable. Now, I don't know where the hell they were during all that period of time, but the 5 people that clapped for your position are still probably the same people. They don't know. Fact is, people get inundated with so much news, they don't remember it more than just this. I bet you could walk through the streets of the town next door to where that killing occurred, and you could find 50 people in the first 100 who never heard of the damn thing.
But I don't really think it's a problem if they've heard about it.
Have made up their minds.
And I mean, you know this so well. In a trial, the jury is selected, and the courtroom is a very particular hot environment.
Is that what you had in mind?
Pardon?
I asked him if that was he had in mind to be able to communication with juries back and forth. Yeah, you have to shut the jury off from outside communications.
And you're sitting there listening to live witnesses.
Yeah,
the trial
right,
can go
right,
on for a
right.
long time, and it is a kind of powerful experience for a juror. And if you, as you know, talk to jurors after trials, they often will say, well, my inclination at the beginning was this way, and I experienced the testimony and evidence and changed my mind. I think jurors and juries do a magnificent job almost all of the time.
Finders of fact do so impressionistically. If you talk to jurors, and Lord knows I've talked to enough of them after trials, they'll tell you something like this: how could you arrive at that verdict? Well, you could tell right away she was lying. Now that's not an analytical, that's just an impression of what happens. That's why the courts of appeals, the appellate courts, do not reverse findings of fact by the jury or the trial judge, because he does the same thing impressionistically. You saw him, you heard him, you can evaluate from your past experience dealing with human beings whether this is logical, whether it makes sense, whether it's true, whether it's fair. And that's how it works. And so I think, yes, even with all these interspersed, now they have jurors who are entitled to ask questions. As long as they do it the way we're doing it here, where you get to screen the questions ahead of time so that they don't come bursting through with something, how is it, sir, that you were committed to murder and trying to get away with it? You know, that sort of question. No, but I think it'll work. We will find our way out. As the very famous American once said, we will overcome.
Let me ask you, Bob, how do you define news? And who makes the decision of what news is?
It should be something fresh and new and ideally of consequence or interest to people. We now, I think for somebody, an old timer like myself, it's very difficult to appreciate how the whole news environment has changed with the internet and the speed and impatience that drives everything. It's, you know, give me a sound bite. Everything is reduced, or too many things are reduced to one sentence. And people are, in a sense, are drowning in too much information. And I think we really need to figure out the matters that are consequential, like wars. How do we decide to go to war? How, as somebody at dinner was asking the very smart question about these drone strikes against alleged terrorists in Yemen or Pakistan, other places in the world where the CIA says so-and-so's a terrorist, we have evidence, and so they send one of the Predator drones over and they kill him.
Yeah.
And talk about summary justice. Is that, suppose that we did that in this country, there would be, there would be more than outrage.
If the government does it.
Pardon?
If the government does it.
Yeah.
We don't seem to be outraged over the fact that in the city of Chicago, more people are killed in the streets by somebody who's executing what they consider to be justice by one gang member shooting another gang member, executing. But that's not the government. That's people acting on their own. That should get people mad, really mad, because your own neighbors are doing it.
You have 30 people who agree with you.
29, one was my wife, but go ahead.
Well, let me ask you, Justice Bauer, what must be done in the civil justice system in light of the skyrocketing cost to maintain the maximum accessibility to the courts?
I don't know what you do about the cost. What's driven the cost up again is the improvement in communications. So that nobody writes a letter anymore, makes a phone call, they write something down. And when they go to try a case, the discovery alone will drive it. Not too long ago, a group in Texas consisting of professors, insurance people, and frequent litigators checked with people or companies that are involved in litigation constantly. And they found out that they'll write off $250,000 loss without even filing suit. When I started to practice law, if somebody came in with a $50 case, and I shook his hand, $500 he got him a kiss. But now they write off $250,000 because it'll cost more than that to collect. Even if they win, they lose. So they just write the damn thing off. What you do about it, I don't know. We've got to figure out something, though, some way of streamlining the discovery process that cuts it down, because that's what's killing it. It's also killing people to learn how to try cases, because you can't afford to try a case for less than, say, $400,000, which means, where do you learn?
Yeah.
Only place you can get an education now as a trial lawyer early on is in a prosecutor's office, where they can try cases for drunk driving, speeding, all sorts of things, where the consequences aren't so terrible. They learn how to try a case, and you try those just like you try a murder case, just like you try a $1 million case. So the answer is we have to reverse all the communication programs they produce. And I don't know how to do it. We get rid of Google for one thing. But, now, people quit sending all these things that are memorialized out there and then wonder why they got. The best thing that happened to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Internal Revenue is those things, because all they do is go and take the documents from the people, read it, and there they are. They've hung themselves. And they'll tell you that. That produced all the increases in the various fraud cases and bank failures and everything else. So I don't know what you do to increase the availability of people. The courts are there. It just costs them too much to hire a lawyer and get it done. Start working for free and then we're busy.
Now I got to ask, my wife, Dr. Costanzo, wanted me to ask this question to you, Bob. How is the status of Obamacare doing in the political and judicial fields?
Oh, can we take a poll? I know this area, and I have no illusions that this is a representative sample of America. How many generally are in favor and approve of Obamacare, the Health Reform Act? Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Only one hand, ma'am, please. How many are generally opposed and think it won't work? Okay, well, see? Yeah. More in favor of it.
Yeah.
That's
They're older
interesting.
and sicker, that's why.
That's interesting. I mean, this is DuPage County, right? I'm going to call it.
Obamacare you just counted.
Yeah, but that's right. This is an academic community, so it's not representative. Obamacare is before the Supreme Court. And as you may recall, a couple of months ago after the oral arguments, there was an intense news coverage of these oral arguments. And respected journalists said, because of the questioning, you can tell what the outcome is going to be, and it looks like Obamacare is dead. Now, Judge Bauer, you know that oral argument for a Supreme Court justice or an appellate court is a small part of what you see. And when doing a book on the U.S. Supreme Court, The Brethren, some 30 years ago, discovered that the justices look at oral argument as kind of a public forum, an opportunity to maybe stick the needle in some of the lawyers, get some of the issues on the table, but there are a large number of briefs, amicus briefs from people who are not parties to a specific lawsuit. The justices have conferences, they exchange memos, there are informal discussions at lunch and so forth. So you can't even come close to telling what's the outcome is going to be. And I want to tell this story from the Brethren because it illustrates how things change once a case gets to the court. In 1970, the Supreme Court had the case of Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer who'd been convicted of dodging the draft. He was a black Muslim and claimed he was a conscientious objector. The court was not going to take the case, and then Justice Brennan, and again, this was all behind the scenes and not public. Justice Brennan said, Ali is an iconic figure in America. He is entitled to a Supreme Court opinion. Yes, he's clearly guilty. We're going to uphold the conviction, but that's what the Supreme Court should do for somebody like Muhammad Ali. So he persuaded 3 other justices to vote with him, took 4 to take the case, and they took the case. 1 justice was out, recused himself, Thurgood Marshall, because he'd been Solicitor General during the argument. So there are 8 justices, and their first conference, they say, yeah, Ali, guilty. not really a conscientious objector. It's going to be 8-0. We're going to hand this opinion down. And so a couple of justices start thinking, oh, wait a minute. This really is one of the revered figures in America. Do we want the Supreme Court to send him to jail? And they start thinking about something people think courts don't worry about their self-image, but they do, correct? That they
Some do.
Some do, okay. That's called the non-denial denial. And of course, just like all individuals and institutions, they're concerned about their image. So a couple of the justices switched their vote, so it finally gets down to about 5-3. Still going to be send Ali to jail, and the opinion is assigned to Justice Harlan, one of the great justices on the Supreme Court, quite conservative. One of his law clerks assigned to work on the case got the black Muslim literature and looked at it and said, you know, I think you can make a case that Ali is a conscientious objector. And he gave the material to Justice Harlan, who took it home. Harlan was almost blind at that point. He had a high, intense lighting system in his home, and he read through the black Muslim literature and said, he went back the next day and said, yeah, I think you're right. I'm going to switch my vote. So it's 4-4. And under the Supreme Court rules, as Judge Bauer knows, I think it's the same in an appellate court. If it's tied, there's no opinion.
That's right. The lower court stands.
Right, exactly. So it's 4-4, and then they start saying, oh, then we're not going to give Ali his opinion from the Supreme Court, so a couple of other justices decide they'll change their votes. And so now it's 7-1 the other way. Chief Justice Berger is the one who wants to send Ali to jail, and he goes into a rage and says, we took this case to send Ali to jail. He clearly is a draft dodger, and now it's 7-1, and I'm the only one, and I'm going to be hanging out there, and people are going to say I'm a racist, so I'm going to change my vote. And it comes out 8-0, exactly the other way. The opinion is announced, and Ali says the following: I thank Allah and the Supreme Court of the United States of America, not knowing that it went 8-0 the other way. So to judge these debates, it's going to be inside the court. I quite frankly think that there will be lots of pressure, good pressure, in a major case like this to be unanimous or have not a 5-4 decision, and that Chief Justice Roberts will try to find some sort of compromise, quite likely strike down some other part of Obamacare, not the individual mandate, so the basic law will stand, and, you know, conceivably a unanimous opinion. At the same time, I may be totally wrong.
That idea just occurred to me while you were talking, that you might be totally wrong. Fact of the matter is, questioning from the bench during oral argument in appellate cases is for a number of different reasons. One of them is the proponent may be arguing for a position that will influence futures that they don't want. That they're perfectly willing to find out that, you know, take the position that he's ultimately going to win, but not on the grounds he's going to. And the question is to puncture it and move it back. The other one, and this is very frequent, is you're asking a question not for the answer, but to influence one of your other people on the bench. You want them to hear it because you have an idea what they're going to do, and you're trying to force them into taking a different position by listening to the answer to the question you propounded.
Next time during oral argument, will you signal when you're asking a question that you're trying to get the attention of...
I throw softballs. I have a couple of members of the court that like to destroy people, just beat them up. And so frequently they'll not get to answer the question. So one of the people they can't shut up is me. So I say, did you answer Judge Posner's question? And he says, no, I didn't. Well, go ahead, I want to hear the answer. Now he can talk because I've given him the opening. Of course, some of them get so gun-shy, they think I'm leading him into a trap, and they go, react this way.
But the general point is, in an appellate court or the Supreme Court, not a perfect process, but a very rigorous process.
Oh, yeah.
One where issues of law and fact and consequence are debated with, I always found in doing the brethren, the Supreme Court, you can argue with it, you can not be happy with it, but there is an intellectual engagement at the highest level.
You know, there are 30,000 judges in America. Only 3% of them are federal judges, and a very small percent of those are appellate court judges. Each one of the, when I get on the bench any given day, I have to have read 1,000 pages of briefs, and discussed it with the clerks assigned to it, and done my own research on the problem. So it's not, and then I have to meet with 2 other people who are listening to the same thing, doing the same thing, and we rehash it and come to a conclusion. And there are drafts exchanged back and forth between judges and among judges. And finally you work one out. Sometimes I will walk down to another judge's chambers and say, this is a fine opinion, except this. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I will have to dissent. And it'll come out 70% of the time. If it doesn't, I got to dissent. But there you are. It is, no, they're not getting treated lightly. I think the litigants on the Supreme Court level, the Court of Appeals level, and the state Supreme Court and so on get all the attention they're entitled to. Because people, we take this thing seriously. You said earlier about people that were infused with law. If you aren't really enthusiastic about the law, this is a terrible job. But if you really like it, this is the greatest job in the world.
No, I think being a reporter is a better job, quite frankly. I'll tell you why.
In your case, you get paid more.
I mean, this is why. You have cases, and some of them are great and challenging, and a lot of them are routine or kind of dull. In the news business, you go in the morning to the newsroom, and the question is, what's new? What don't we know? What does it mean? Let's spend our time on things that matter to people. And I think if somebody came from Mars and spent a year in the United States and then went back and the Martians said, who has the best job? The best jobs in America, they would say the journalists. Because here's the thing, you get to make momentary entries into people's lives when they're interesting, and then get the hell out when they cease to be interesting. And that is a great luxury in your job, or practicing lawyer or doctor. You know, you can't kind of say, oh, to the patient who comes in, you know, the 7th case of, whatever you've seen that's just boring. You can't say, that's boring, don't come in. In the news business, you can say, it's not news, it's boring. And go for things that are more engaging.
I have a different point of view of what the media does. It's absolutely good. If it weren't for the media, it's just like defense lawyers representing people they know are guilty. Because the Constitution says we can put people in jail, but first we have to prove them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the defense lawyer makes you do it, so they keep the system honest. The media keeps the entire system honest. If they're doing their job right, every time you do something, you realize somebody's looking over my shoulder. You know, conscience is supposed to be something that, what it is that still little voice saying somebody's watching you. That's what it is, you know. And most people don't need much provocation to get their conscience going. There's just some people who just don't have one. The media, they don't. That's odd. I thought.
And that is the danger and peril of having a crippled media now.
Right.
Media that's not aggressive enough, not working, not digging.
Or has already made up their minds.
And my dreary prediction is that we're going to miss something very substantial. in the media, and it's going to be, you know, you could list all kinds of environmental hazards, food coming from China and so forth. We should really be looking at the Food and Drug Administration. What is the monitoring? We spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year to keep terrorists out of the country.
Yeah.
And what do we spend to keep tainted food out of the country? Almost nothing. And there could be a calamity, and then people are going to say, where's the media? And then the Googles and Facebook and Apple, who have all the money, are going to say, maybe we have to get in the content business. We just can't take the advertising revenue. We're going to have to enter into doing something about probing into what's really going on.
Before you do that, somebody will file suit, and some court is going to have to make some brilliant decisions.
Well, I think it comes at this time in the program that we asked the audience if they have any questions. We have a gentleman over here.
The aisles. If you have a question, if you could come out to the aisles.
Okay.
Peggy is standing over on that side too. Thank you.
If you're way in the back, you can stay back there and holler, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Judge Bauer. Mr. Woodward, you said earlier that the job of the media is to challenge the establishment. Judge Bauer, who is the establishment now, and are they being challenged, in your opinion?
I am. Now, the establishment is, I assume the government is what you're talking about. State, local, county, federal, everything else.
It's an excellent question. I wouldn't say it's limited to just challenging the establishment, but that's part of it. And
Business
what
would be one.
it should do is examine concentrations of power, and
Right.
they're often
There you
in
go.
government, but they're often in other institutions, like the Catholic Church. I mean, look at all the investigations
I
of
knew
the
you'd
Catholic
get to this
Church.
anti-Catholic. I'm graduate of Immaculate Conception High School. I just didn't throw that in to start.
Next question. Joe?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Do you think foreigners should own our press? Rupert Murdoch, should he be allowed to do what he does, promote the sides that he does, even though he's not an American citizen?
You know, I think the ownership of the media is not really a big problem, and I think it would be, you know, almost contrary to the First Amendment to say that only people who own the American newspapers and broadcasting networks have to be U.S. citizens. I mean, quite honestly, it wouldn't make sense and it wouldn't work. And I think the judge would say it's unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional is the first answer.
Right? We just got a ruling.
That's unequivocally.
Next question.
So the question here that I have has to do with, I think, truth and justice, but I want a specific example, namely that last December, President Obama signed into law the, I think it was called the Military or Defense Military Appropriations Bill, which included a part which effectively vetoed or canceled all of our rights as stipulated in the Bill of Rights. Namely, it gave the military the power
Is that a question?
to
That's what I'm talking about.
arrest, basically incarcerate any individual that was thought to be a threat to the United States without due process, and the individual could be incarcerated without a specific period of time.
It's directed at you, Judge.
Right,
No,
because
both
I
of
know
you.
due process. you
Could
did.
we have the question again?
No, it was too long the first time.
Just make it short so we can.
What, in 10 words or less, what the hell do you want to know?
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is some questions just simply aren't that simple. But, okay, how does, within the context of truth and justice, how does one view what was signed into law last December by President Obama under the Defense Appropriations Act, which effectively gave the military the right to incarcerate any individual, American or otherwise, anywhere in the world, without habeas corpus, without due process. Thank you.
I haven't the foggiest idea. I can't answer your question because I don't really understand the implications.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I haven't done any original reporting on it, so I don't have any knowledge. But I think the question about whether you can just incarcerate somebody because of suspicions, because of
we've been doing that for years. That's called pre-trial detention. When you arrest somebody for murder, for instance, he doesn't go out on bond. Now that's holding him till the trial. Is that what you had in mind? Something less than murder?
You know, this is one of the most important decisions that was made, I think, during the Obama administration. In terms of speaking about the news media reporting important information to the public, you guys ought to look into this. I mean, it really is important. It is the December Military Appropriations Act and the stipulations within that act.
Yeah, I think it's something, your point is well taken and should be looked at, to say the least.
Yeah.
Sir.
I do too, in case you're curious.
Yes.
Bob Woodward.
Yes.
Bob, do you think the national press in the United States today is manipulative? And what would you do about it?
Is manipulated?
Manipulative.
Of what?
They try to be.
You mean ideological, it's partisan, or?
Manipulative of whatever news comes out.
No, I think the problem with the media is we don't really dig into things enough, as I've said. I agree sometimes there's spin, a partisan, unfair approach in lots of stories, in lots of coverage, in the cable news. You know, they do it through an ideological prism, which I don't think really serves. But the problem is time. You know, this is the old adage about time against the problem. You've got to spend time to dig in and find out what's going on. Let me tell an anecdote about that addresses the question what we're up against in the news media, and I think you as citizens who are consumers of what the news media put out. This was some years ago. My wife and I were at a conference and there was a panel on aging, the aging process. Anyone here interested in the issue of aging?
Yeah, I'm for it.
We've got unanimous consent here on the stage. And they had physicians and psychiatrists and academics, and James Watson, the head, the co-discoverer of DNA and Nobel Prize winner, was on the panel, and everyone's talking about aging, what it means. It was a smart discussion, and James Watson said nothing. And he said, in a moment, I mean, like this, the power of silence just grows over time. And finally, the moderator said, Dr. Watson, what do you think about aging? How should we deal with aging? And so Dr. Watson leaned into his microphone and said, my advice, the only way to deal with aging is stay away from old people. Wow, he nailed it. So they then hand out these little sheets of paper where you score your lifestyle. And it asks questions, you know, ever had these diseases? Do you eat red meat? Do you smoke? How often do you exercise? And you get points and you add it up and it tells you how many years you have to live. Well, you know, that's something you spend some time on. And so my wife and I were sitting behind Dr. Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, while everyone's filling out their form. And my wife Elsa and I decided to avail ourselves of the Reporters' Freedom of Information Act, and we looked over his shoulder. It's called observation, right? Going to the scene. And looked, and it turned out Kissinger had scored himself on this, and he died 4 years ago. Not happy at all. I've seen him, some of the things I've written he hated, and he was not happy, but this was the moment of deepest unhappiness. And so he kind of looks around, and he gets his eraser out, and he erases all the answers. And opens shuttle diplomacy with the questions. Oh, it turns out last time he ate red meat was 1949. He exercises 2 times a day. And he rescores. And turns out he has 8 years to live.
He's still
under
alive.
the rescoring. Now, I tell the story because of the rescoring. That's what goes on in Washington, in particular, in politics, in human nature. Yep. They rescore. I go do interviews for these books with people involved. On the last book, Obama's Wars, and you ask, well, what was your recommendation to the president about the Afghanistan war? Well, it was the following. Then you come back 6 months later, and it turned out that recommendation wasn't very good. And so you ask again, said, oh no, you misunderstood, my recommendation was the opposite, and they rescore. And it doesn't take 6 months, sometimes takes 5 minutes, and the people are rescoring. And so the problem of bias and partisanship and just stupid coverage is there. The big, giant problem, the herd of elephants in the room for you as consumers of the news media is, what's the quality? What's the level of effort? Is somebody really trying to understand and explain? And have they been willing to take the very difficult steps? We talk about decisions in the appellate court or the Supreme Court. There is a rigor to it, and if there's a rigor to it, it's going to be better quality. But there's not enough money and not enough rigor.
Next question.
I'll hold it, please. Let me start by saying I have yet to hear a definition of justice. I'd like to pursue that.
Go ahead.
In various religions, there are notions of justice. In the Hebrew faith, in the Hebrew Bible, justice means being respectful of the rights and needs of others, caring for others, and so on. I believe that's the essence of the Christian faith still. The various other faiths have different notions of justice. Clearly, to me, when something terrible happens and you think, oh, this person deserves very great punishment, but then you find the person is mentally incapable, there is a compassion, there is a special treatment. I find it impossible to believe, and I mean no disrespect.
Sure you do it, go ahead.
The judge. It's impossible for me to believe that decisions can be made without a personal bias. And I particularly ascribe this to the Supreme Court of the United States. Clearly, there are conservatives.
Your question.
Clearly, there are moderates. Clearly, there are liberals.
Okay.
Would you please define justice?
If I may interrupt you, your question is a good one about how you would define justice.
Well, there is no absolute definition of justice. It varies from place it. From my point of view, justice is following the law as enunciated by the Congress, supported by the court decisions on it, insofar as possible. I do not think that I'm doing perfect justice. I don't think I'm given the opportunity to do perfect justice, and I wouldn't know what it was if I had to. I couldn't say that I am the be-all and all to decide who should go to jail, who should not go to jail, except I could say who broke a law and who didn't break a law. If the factual thing is that way, that's how it comes out. But other places, there are millions of people, billions I think in the world, that think if you steal something, they should cut your hand off. And I think that's perfectly logical.
Yeah. But
the
question here, real quickly, your point about the Supreme Court, it appears that it's somewhat partisan at times, both ways, because you have voting blocks that vote this way and vote, and the Gore v. Bush decision in 2000 is something that people have raised questions, what's going on here? Why do the justices appointed by one president vote this way?
Well, the big dissent in the Gore case was John Paul Stevens, who was appointed by President Ford, who happened to be a Republican. Souter was on the same thing, and he was appointed by Reagan.
Yeah, but
I say it's more than that. It's the way they look at it.
But it's more about that there is
what you're talking about, how
way
the people
of looking at things that they have, and
you don't divorce yourself.
We should move on.
You don't divorce yourself from your own experiences in making decisions like that. Yes.
Thank you very much. We got another question?
Here, over here.
A question for Justice Bauer, please. I want to refer back to Justice Rathje's opening question of whether litigants can get justice in American courtrooms. It seems like every week we read a story about the reversal of a years or decades old criminal conviction based on newly analyzed DNA.
Ah, yes.
And does this not raise questions of how many legions of criminals, convicted persons there are languishing in jail despite their innocence? And does it raise questions on the foundations of the trial process, of the overzealous prosecutor, the underfunded public defender, the witness who can't remember?
Almost all sappy, because the public defenders are paid pretty much the same as the prosecutors are. The overzealous prosecutor who goes forward to get somebody, remember, when I brought an indictment as a prosecutor, I get it from the grand jury. One of the great stories was you get indicted ham sandwich. The problem is then you have to go before 12 people who don't know about you or don't care about you and convince them beyond a reasonable doubt that the ham sandwich should go to jail. And the judge is ruling against you on every chance he gets. One of the things about being a judge is when you rule in favor of the defendant, nobody gets to review it at all. Because if there's a not guilty, that's the end of that. So that's a myth. The question is, did he commit the crime? Not what the motivation of the prosecutor was or anything else. You get justice if you don't break the law. You don't have to worry much. I think what we're talking about is, when do you not want to send people to jail? There has to be a reason to send them to jail, not just that you can do it, but why do you do it? It is an absolute fact that about 80% of the cases that came through the U.S. Attorney's Office were sent out. That is, we did not proceed. We quit. They were guilty, all right, but what difference does it make? I could not for the life of me understand why Martha Stewart had to go to jail. I didn't feel a bit safer when she was in jail than I did when she was out. She did what about 99 and 4400% of the people did. They got a piece of inside information, she acted on it, and she made money. So, why don't we take all her money? Why do we have to send her to jail? It makes no sense, but that's a personal opinion. The government wastes their time doing things. I do not think the present drug program is worth a darn. But those are the laws that are passed by Congress and passed by the legislature, and those are the laws I have to work with. And unless I want to do away with that system and do the anarchy, that's what I'm doing. So it's, I'm stuck. There's nothing about it. I do not think I'm doing perfect justice, and I don't think he's writing perfect truth. But I'm not sure what either one is.
What did he say?
And he's not even hard of hearing, so go ahead.
Am I getting summary judgment?
Yes.
Next question.
My question is for Bob Woodward. We know about the partisanship in the Supreme Court. Do you think they can be truly, indiscriminate in their judgments, or can they really get rid of their private feelings? You think the Supreme Court justices? We know that Justice Brennan and Justice Stevens.
In other words, can you have a Supreme Court justice who is not partisan, who will really look at the law and the Constitution? And the answer is yes.
Can they really overcome their private opinions?
Oh, there's more.
What?
Can they really overcome their private opinions and deal with the facts of the case? Do you think that's possible?
Yes, I think it is possible. I think it happens all the time. And I mean, if you look at the case I gave, the Muhammad Ali, the inclination was, let's send him to jail. It went through a process. Now, it was not a perfect process, and some of it had to do with the justice's assessment of the image of the court. But there was a reasonable basis for it, and all of them wound up changing their minds. So I think that's possible. I think there's not enough of it, and I quite frankly think, and this is not news, but the Supreme Court has an image problem because it looks like there are voting blocs that are driven, whether you want to say ideologically or from a partisan perspective, it just looks that way. And so, that's something they're going to have to address or not address. They don't have to.
Thank you.
Woodward, in the changing media landscape, I want to know what you think the future of traditional media, especially the newspaper, is. And if it disappears, how do you think this will impact citizens being informed?
The news media, we have some printing presses we'd like to sell. I'm not sure I don't literally mean that, but I think the newspapers are going to be here. But we've got to do things that are more probing and make the newspaper, whether it's delivered in paper or online, and with the Washington Post, the online viewership is multiples of what it is on paper, so everything is going online. But in the old days, we used to call a newspaper story that was really good a bacon cooler. And it meant that you're eating breakfast and you're reading the paper and you have the bacon on a fork and the story's so good, the bacon gets cold. We need more bacon coolers. And we need to connect to people's lives, and you have to say, oh, I want to read about that. I want to know about that. And that's a big challenge, and we've just got to do better. I worry that there is so much manufactured controversy where in the news media, you will look and somebody will say something bad about somebody and then they respond and back and forth, and that becomes the story, and sometimes it's really about nothing. It's been manufactured by one of the parties in the dispute or by the news media itself, because we've got the president calling somebody something and somebody calling the president something.
Yeah.
This is for Mr. Woodward. First of all, I'd like to thank you three gentlemen for being here tonight and the college.
Hold the microphone. Thank you.
This is really terrific. Mr. Woodward, you covered Richard Nixon for years, and there's been hundreds of books written about the man. He's still an enigma. And I'm curious, politics and history aside, Richard Nixon, the man, what kind of a guy was he? I mean, was he an oddball? Was he, again, all history and politics aside?
No, that's a great question. I was not on his Christmas card list, but the secret to Nixon, and it is in his tapes, and this constant, we're going to screw somebody, and not really thinking about the dog that never barks on the Nixon tapes, to my knowledge. No one ever says, what would be good, what would be right, what does the country need? It was always about Nixon, using the presidency as an instrument of personal revenge or reward. And so the tragedy was the smallness of all of this. And then you say, well, why was he so small? And part of the answer comes from like is often the case, comes from Nixon himself. The day he resigned, it was in August 1974. The night before he went on television, if you were around, you look young, you weren't. He announced he was going to resign, and then the next day he called all of his senior staff, cabinet, and friends to the East Room of the White House. And you may have seen videos of this, and Nixon was there, his wife, 2 daughters, 2 son-in-laws, and it was Nixon raw, unscripted. He had no speech, and he talked about his mother and his father, and about Teddy Roosevelt. He read from Teddy Roosevelt's diary about Teddy Roosevelt losing his wife, and the light went out of his life forever, almost comparing the loss of the presidency with the loss of a spouse. And people who I knew, and Carl and I knew, who were in the audience, were just worried that he's going to be the first person to go stark raving mad on live national television, because it was a psychiatric hour. But then Nixon kind of waves his hand, like, this is why I called you all here, and he said the following: always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them, and then you destroy yourself. Now think of the wisdom.
Pretty good self-analysis, yeah. Hate. Yeah.
He got it that day, that the hating was the piston that was driving him, and that hating, and he said in a very, I think, pretty straight way, hating destroys you, not the other person. And there is hate that drove Richard Nixon. And there's a lesson for all of us, because we all have enemies or people we don't get along with and so forth. Not you, I understand. Right. Perfect justice, perfect judge. And that hate is the poison in human relations, in politics, and I always, as you know, I recited that line because I think it's something to think about all the time. And we can always do better, that we can work out things. I try to cover politics, and you go back and forth, and you know, the rage that people feel toward the other side, toward the other political party. I mean, the rage, and you kind of want to say, you want to go out and give out Valiums before you interview some of these people, because it's so hyper. And so Nixon was driven by hate, and as he wisely understood the day he resigned, it destroyed him.
Well, one thing about Nixon's resignation that intrigued me was, although you did your noble bit, you caused the thing eventually. He did not destroy the tapes because the Supreme Court of the United States told him he could not. And he lived up to it. Now, I don't know what anybody could have done if he had destroyed the tapes. I was not as concerned about going mad the day you're talking about. It was preceding that, because he's the commander-in-chief of the Army, Navy, and Marines. There's no question he was the most powerful man in the world. And he's being forced to leave that job, the most powerful job in the United States, because public opinion forces him out of him, because he had a turnover that they said Supreme Court told him he had to. And he lived up to it. When I remember watching the White House the night they had all the news cameras out, and they were panning the streets in Pennsylvania Avenue. Once in a while, you'd see a car go by, a squad car. Not one tank, not one bayonet unsheathed, not one shot fired, and the most powerful man in the world quit the most powerful job in the world. I thought then the system worked. Even if we had nuts in charge of parts of it, it worked. And it worked because the Supreme Court said it had to work, and people believed it.
But it wasn't just the Supreme Court.
No.
I mean, the institutional response, if you think about, and I don't want to spend too long on this, but it's really important to understand the institutional response in the Congress. The Senate of the United States, after we wrote those stories, Senator Ervin called me up and said, I want to know your sources. And I said, I'm not going to tell you our sources. And he said, we're going to conduct an investigation. The Senate Watergate Committee was set up. The vote to establish that investigation of Nixon and Watergate was 77-0.
Right.
Now, think right now, if they ever wanted to investigate Obama or a Republican president, you would never get a unanimous vote. What the Senate did, and what Senator Ervin said, we have an obligation that goes beyond our partisan responsibility.
I wasn't discounting there. I said they got the information.
And quite frankly, Nixon resigned not because of the Democrats or because of the press. He resigned because of the Republican Party. The Republican Party rose up, and exemplified by Senator Barry Goldwater, who went down a couple of days before the resignation and sent the message to the president. Nixon asked him, in the course of this, I mean, one of the astonishing things, Senator Goldwater gave Carl Bernstein and I his personal diary about what happened in his engagements with Nixon. And Goldwater went down there with the other Republican leaders, and Nixon said, well, I'm going to be impeached in the House and in the Senate. What do I have? Maybe 20 votes, which of course would mean he'd be expelled from office. And Barry Goldwater looked him in the eye and said, no, Mr. President, you have 4 votes in the Senate. And the next day, Nixon announced he was resigning. And as Goldwater said in his diary, too many lies, too many crimes.
Yep.
Hi, Mr. Woodward. I had a question also about Watergate. What do you think as a nation was the greatest lesson that we learned from Watergate, and what did you learn personally?
Personally, just learned how you don't know where a story's going to lead, and how, if you look back on it, how obvious so much of it was, and how we were lucky, and we got sources, and we had a publisher and an editor who said, go to it. We have a duty to get to the bottom of this story. The lesson of Watergate is complex, because what Watergate has been muddled over the last 4 decades. And Carl Bernstein and I, because the 40th anniversary of the Watergate burglary, are going to write a piece for the Post about what was Watergate. And we're still 40 years later trying to work it out and what the lessons are. And clearly one of the lessons is that when you have, when you've been elected to any office, or you hold any office or any position of responsibility, that you have, it's not about you. It's about executing that office. And I always ask the question of students, how would you define the job of President of the United States? Or you ask people that, and they kind of, well, the job of the President of the United States is to figure out what the next stage of good is for a majority of people in the country, not for a party, not for an interest group, but for a majority of people in the country. Develop a plan and then execute it. Maybe winning a war, fixing the economy, saving the environment, whatever it is. You have to connect to that notion of the next stage of good for a majority of people in the country. And that Nixon failed at that. And that you can debate about all the other presidents. I've tried to understand Carter through Obama, Bush, Clinton, and lots of criticism of all of them, but I have not found any of them that operated outside that parameter like Nixon. Nixon, it was for him and it wasn't for the country, and I think you look in depth at the presidencies of these other people. Ford really cared. Carter, lots of criticism, but cared. Reagan had a vision. George Bush, probably one of the George Bush Sr. underappreciated presidencies. Bill Clinton's presidency, 8 years. I've often said this, but if in 2008 you had Obama, McCain, and a third item on the ballot, which was peace and prosperity of the Clinton years, was 8 years of peace and prosperity. So Clinton certainly I had my problems with him. I think America has their problems with Clinton, but it was peace and prosperity. It was good faith. I think George W. Bush, lots of mistakes, good faith effort. Obama, good faith effort. And so ultimately, deciding who to vote for is kind of a character judgment.
Mr. Woodward, the question that I have has to do with the strength of character. Now, you talked about the Supreme Court, and Mr. Obama has told them that they are judicial activists and can be seen as judicial activists rather than Supreme Court justices. Now, they have created a political monster in the Citizens United, the super PACs. Now they're close to ruining the United States political system. Do you believe that the court has the strength of character to reverse that decision?
Okay, well, let's get Judge Bauer to tell us also, we operate from the same fact basis, what the Citizens United case is.
Citizens United case is a First Amendment problem, whether you can spend your own money any way you want. And people can't tell you can't spend money to elect somebody. And that boils it down to its simplest. You can get nuances going back and forth, but that's the predicate for the decision altogether. First Amendment required it be done. That's what they said. And so, I mean, here is the argument for the case in the Constitution. I mean, suppose they said to me, oh, you can't write a book about something and publish it and distribute it, and my friend Louis Rathje can't use all of his money to buy copies and give it away free to everyone. I mean, that would be absurd that you would try to stop something like that. As the court looked at it as a First Amendment case, which it is, but I think it's also a government corruption issue. And I suspect it will not be revisited, but maybe it will. And we are about, in the next 6 months, in this presidential election, to travel down the sewer. Because the super PACs on both sides, people ideologically driven, are going to spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising. And that is, believe me, that's a lot of advertising. And they are going to say negative things about both candidates that I suspect on election day you're going to see most people going into the ballot holding their nose and saying, okay, I'm going to vote for one of these guys. My real opinion is I think it's going to be a burden on the standard mainstream media, the bloggers, the tweeters, the
whatever people on the internet to sort out what's true and what's untrue. And so I think there's going to be a kind of war between the super PACs, and I hope a resurgence of the media and doing some truth squatting and fact checking on some of this stuff so it can tell people who's the real Barack Obama, who's the real Mitt Romney.
Thank you.
This question is either for Bob Woodward or for Judge Bauer. It's a long one. No, just kidding. What's it going to take to get more people to vote?
I love that. I don't know. I encouraged them completely when I was running. I have no idea. And I don't know why people don't vote. I can think of no good reason not to vote. If you complain about government at all, or you have any interest in the future of your children or your grandchildren, you should do the best you can in investigating and then vote. You may not be right all the time, but nobody's right all the time. We're going to make mistakes, but please at least participate. It's what makes this country the freest place in the world, is because we have the right to do that. We pick our own authorities. We select them, and we vote for them. And even if we lose, we have won something. We have won the right to try and select our own leadership. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people only works if the people participate. If they don't, you can't force it on them. You can't make people vote. They do in some foreign countries. There's countries that require you to vote. I don't think that's a good way to do it.
Next
question.
You spoke earlier tonight about sensationalist and partisan news reporting. My question is for Mr. Woodward. What would you suggest to this next generation of voters? How do we use the media to our advantage?
What? I'm sorry. What's the question? So hold the microphone closer.
In terms of the partisan and sensationalist news reporting you were speaking about earlier, how would you suggest that this next generation of voters use the media to their full advantage?
Well, first of all, I guess you have to assess what the nature of the problem is. And I will tell one more quick war story about was at this thing in Colorado where it was a conference, and at dinner one night I was seated next to Al Gore, the former vice president. Now, dinner sitting next to Al Gore is taxing. In fact, it's unpleasant. And this is 2005. He'd been out of office 5 years, and he's, if you know Gore's biography, before he became a politician, he was a journalist and practiced journalism. Turns out he thinks he invented that also. And so he's grinding on me real hard. Why don't you come out against Bush in the Iraq War? And I said, I'm just trying to give an impartial presentation of the facts. And he said, horse manure, or words to that effect. And I said, no, I really am. And he said, look, when you were working on Watergate with Carl Bernstein, you came out against Nixon in the crimes of Watergate. And I said, no, actually, we tried to just present facts and be as empirical as we could be. And he said, hey, look, Buster, I read those stories. And I said, I wrote those stories. Didn't move the needle of self-doubt one bit. Not that Gore is somebody who basks in a lot of self-doubt. But then we got to the interesting question of how much we know. And I just said, okay, 8 years in the Clinton White House, what percentage of what went on of interest or consequence do we now know? And he said 1%. And I died. I tried to understand and write about Clinton, and I have to confess to having an unclean thought. It happens sometimes. because when he said 1%, I thought, is it possible there are that many women we don't know about? Could be a big number, Louis, right? And and then I said, suppose you wrote tell-all biography. What percentage would we know then? And he said 2%. Now I think we know 60 to 70%, but maybe the part we don't know is what's really important and defining. So to the next generation, you talk about the next generation of voters, it's the next generation, and still my generation in the media, to present in-depth explanation of who these people are and what goes on. And if Al Gore is just being, sticking it to me when he says 1% or 2%, but the things are hidden. The book I'm working on now about Obama and the economy, it's pages and pages of new information that we don't know. And we have to set ourselves on a course to get that information, and that takes time and money.
Mm-hmm.
My question is for Mr. Woodward. I particularly enjoyed your relating the story about Gerald Ford and his subsequent vindication and his receiving the Profile and Courage Award. My question is, given the current state of politics in Washington, who would be your current nominee for a Profile and Courage Award?
Oh, that's an unfair question. There are some. I mean, I don't think it's for me to judge, really. I think one thing. Last book I did, Obama's Wars, about the war in Afghanistan, the internal decision-making in the White House, tens of thousands of words from top secret notes and documents about really what happened. And I think there's a consensus that Bob Gates, who was the Secretary of Defense, really did a good job, came in under Bush, the surge in Iraq, that Gates was somebody who cared deeply about the soldiers and did things for the soldiers, and in a sense he is somebody who really did his job in an extraordinary way for President George W. Bush from 2006, and then Obama kept him on, and for President Obama. Tough job running the military and the Defense Department, and you could offer, and in my books I've offered criticisms of him, but I think it's somebody. I ran into him giving speeches in California in January. He's now writing his memoir, and I was struck how mellow he was and how he realized his job was to write a memoir that told what really happened and brought some lessons. So, one name.
First, I'd like to thank Judge Ratchey and Judge Bauer for being the people you are, because as a retired lawyer, you make me proud to be a lawyer, knowing that I'm in the same fraternity as you are. But my question is for Mr. Woodward. I read your books, and I read the book about Bush's decision to have the surge in Iraq. And there's a passage on page 247 that I've only read about 40 times, and preceding it, which just talks about the meeting where he decided to do the surge in the solarium of the White House, and you describe the people. The vice president's representative, he wasn't there, but there's Representative Rumsfeld and Gates, both there. The General Petraeus on the phone from Baghdad and so forth. The National Security Advisor, Hadley, Condoleezza Rice, everybody that was important. And the president walked into the meeting with the Secretary of the Treasury, a Chicago area boy, by the way, And they had this discussion.
You read the book. Thank you.
Yeah. But here's there's a
What's
question.
the question?
And at the end of the discussion, they decided to do the surge, which they called double down. And Petraeus said, "It's not double down, Mr. President. It's all in." And at the end of it, quote, somebody asked the Secretary of the Treasury, who hadn't said a word, "Well, Mr. Secretary, you've been kind of quiet. What do you think?" Period. Paragraph. "Well, I haven't," quote, "well, I haven't been around here too long, and I'm not sure what it's all about. What are we trying to accomplish in Iraq? Question mark," end quote. And your words were, "It's been 300,000 in so many days since the war began," and there was no answer. Now, I had read that passage 40 times.
Sounds like
and
it.
Right, because that's, as we used to say in the Army, as a whiskey tango foxtrot moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why isn't there chapters and chapters after that about how we just fought a war for $3 trillion and nobody knew what we were trying to accomplish?
Okay, what I wrote is what I could find out. I interviewed Bush, all the people. I got notes for this is the book, The War Within. And, I'm not taking a stand. I'm trying to describe what they did and their reasoning in the decision-making process, and I think that book does it. And is it, no illusions about that I know everything. I mean, one of the things, I'm sure, Judge, when you rule on a case, and an important case, and write an opinion, you have confidence in it, but you also must know that you don't know everything, and that you have to have the humility, and I tell you, in journalism, you get it every day. The humility of realizing there are things you don't know, things you don't understand, and things you can't explain. What I think important to do is not reach beyond the evidence and facts.
I do the best I can, and I'm sure you do too. But I not for 1 minute think I'm infallible. Never for 1 minute have I thought there's no possibility I could be wrong. I'm always haunted by the idea I could be wrong, but I have to do the best I can and move on. Otherwise, I'm stuck in one spot worrying about it for the rest of my life, and I don't. And I think it's almost 9 o'clock, isn't it?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
No.
5 minutes.
Wait, we
Okay.
got a couple more questions, Jack.
This is the last question.
This is for both of you. Would truth and justice improve in America if we had more than two parties to vote for?
I don't know how.
Easier to describe the creation of the universe. I mean, you just don't know. You just don't know. But, I think there's we have a saying at the Washington Post, which is, all good work is done in defiance of management. And it doesn't mean break the law or break the rules, but it means you've got to be pushing from the bottom. And, the parties come from the bottom. The people say, they're Democrats or Republicans or independents. And I like the defiant streak in journalism, in being a judge, in being anything, that you have to be, you have to defy the system. It's a little bit about challenging the system and so on.
Let me finish my part by a legal thing. The law, as we have to follow, is common sense as modified by the legislature. So, it's easy to work with. It's easy to work with.
But, no one likes, I tell this story all the time about, after I'd finished one of my books, the head of Simon & Schuster, which has published them all, took me to dinner in New York, and I thought, oh, wow, this is great. The boss is taking me to dinner. He sat down, he said, okay, what's your next book going to be? And I said, well, I wanted to do some reading, thinking, reporting. And he said, reading, thinking, reporting? Why are you going to waste time? And I said, well, that's what we tried to do. And he said, no, you are one of our authors. We are in the product delivery business, the marketing, and I need to know tonight what your next book is. And we're going for hours around. A subject would come up and he'd say, why don't you do a book on that? And I said, well, let's, and is one of these people who just grinds on you, you may work for somebody like that. You may be married to somebody like that. Whatever comes up, and so he's just grinding away. And so finally at the end, I said, I figured out my next book. And he said, oh, great, at last, what's your next book? And I said, my next book is going to be an expose of the publishing business in New York City. And he smiled. And he said, that's terrific. You think so? He said, yes, I have a great title for you. And I said, you do? And he said, yes, your book, your expose on the publishing business in New York City will be called My Last Book. And he really meant it.
Now I'd like to introduce Katie Hardison. Katie.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank Mr. Woodward, Justice Rathje, and Judge Bauer for being with us tonight. So let's all give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to Elmhurst College and give an interesting and informative presentation on truth and justice in America today. So I'm a political science student, just having finished finals. I just finished a constitutional law exam. And as a political science student, every time you guys talked about a case, once you would mention Cruzan, I would think of the second respondent. That's just how I think. So I thought that it was necessary to mention and remember an essential component of democracy that I think all of us should remember. And that is that our democracy depends on the marketplace of ideas. And these come from Supreme Court cases. This dialogue is the perfect example of this idea and this exchange of ideas that our country depends on. So I would like to present you guys with a gift on behalf of Elmhurst College.
Oh, very nice.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good.
Katie.
Great. Good.
I would also like to thank all of you for joining us this evening and encourage you to attend other Elmhurst College events, including the Elmhurst College Annual Summer Extravaganza, featuring Dee Dee Bridgewater and our Elmhurst College Jazz Band on Saturday, June 16th at 6:30 p.m. on our College Mall. For information, please visit our website at www.elmhurst.edu. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Our lectures are free, but once again, they are not without cost. So if you've enjoyed tonight's lecture, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Friends of the Arts of Elmhurst College. You can use the envelope that was in your program, or you can hand your contribution to one of our students in the lobby. They're holding buckets. Just drop it in there. We greatly appreciate any of your support. Thank you again.